Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Today at the Latinx Research Center, we have with us author of Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas, Roberto Lovato. Roberto is a Salvadorian American who has experienced what it means to be both Salvadorian and American, living during the rise of MS-13 in California while also fighting during wartime in El Salvador against US-backed fascist military. Today, Roberto uses his experience and life stories in his journalism, work, and activism, including his book, Unforgetting. So today we've prepared some questions about your book and your lived experience. And does anyone want to first start us off?
Can I just say thank you for being the brilliant students that I expect Berkeley to have. I'm happy to be with you again.
Okay, I guess I'll ask the first question. So we are organizing around critical perspectives on democracy and media in the Americas. And in a way, your book, Unforgetting, might be considered a kind of critical perspective on these two terms, democracy and media. I wonder if you might help us break it down a bit. What does democracy and media mean to you? And what does it mean to be critical of those terms based on your lived experiences growing up in the United States?
Democracy and media?
Correct. But you can separate the terms as well.
Yeah, let's take them one by one and then see if there's an intersection between the two. So, I have limited experience with democracy because what the hell is democracy, right? It was a construct that came out of the Greek experience of the demos and was then translated into what they call Western history, when there's other forms of decision making, community, and making your priorities. And so I've tried to, in my life, kind of look past traditional ideas of democracy like you're taught in political science, where democracy and politics are defined within this border wall of elections. Okay, well, if we limit the political to within the borders of elections, those who've been left out of history, those of us who've been left out of electoral politics, those of us who've been marginalized, oppressed, are screwed. I hate to be so frank, but you know the job was dangerous when you took it to interview me. So, yeah, we're screwed if we limit ourselves to elections, our definition of politics and of democracy. Having said that, I think it's important to engage in politics, but politics that are not controlled by corporate interests, for example, in the United States, that controls both parties. We see this in the campaign of people like Bernie Sanders, where he should have been president, but there was a heavy move by the corporations and their political allies to push, Bernie Sanders out of the contention for the presidency, and they dissed him. They made him look like a socialist and all this. I mean, he's a socialist, but what's the fear of this term? So I've experienced democracy, and I prefer democracy desde abajo, democracy from below. Whether it's in an anarchist tradition or an indigenous tradition. Like, many people don't know that the idea that we have in the U.S. government of having a Congress comes from indigenous peoples in what we call the United States, right? People like Thomas Jefferson and others were studying what the Iroquois Confederation was doing, and they stole the ideas, just like they steal the land, just like they stole the culture. Even today, right? We see these patterns. So, we owe our ideas of democracy in part to the Iroquois people, but I don't think the Iroquois people ever imagined, for example, having, McDonald's and Microsoft and Facebook and Twitter and Jeff Bezos and all these increasingly fascistic, and I do mean fascistic, interests like Elon Musk, a racist, almost Nazi who runs Twitter now and has destroyed it as a platform for social change. So I think, I have examples of democracy desde abajo, like during the war in El Salvador that I participated in. You know, they were in the zonas de control, the areas of control of the guerrilla. We had, you know, people who were in councils making their own decisions at the town level, controlling the resources, deciding together what to do about a river and how to channel the water and how to share the water. What happens to a guy that beats up his wife or a woman in this town? The guy would have to go, what they call cara al pueblo. He'd have to go give face to the community, be accountable for either beating or raping a woman. And hell, imagine if we lived in a society like that, what it would be like for women to be able to count on that, for example. You know, instead we have what we have, right? Courts that still privilege men. You know, you look at the Supreme Court with another Nazi, what's his name? The Kavanaugh, the whole Kavanaugh fiasco. You know, that he's not just a right-wing extremist, he's also a rapist, abuser. So, I mean, you know, this is the contradiction we live in. And so I look to examples like, or even like going back to the example of water, you know, I spent time with indigenous peoples across the Americas. And so I wrote a story about something called acequias, which are water management systems that were actually born in the Arabian Peninsula, right? And it involved collective decision making about how to distribute water instead of the current model, right, which corporations are increasingly owning the water we drink. Like my brother works for a water distribution company. He tells me all about the machinations and power plays of big water like Coca-Cola and Dasani, and you know, and we're in a increasingly drought-filled world. So this very democratic Arabian model was then transferred to the place where the Arabs conquered, which is Spain, right? The Arabs ruled Spain for the better part of 800 years. So then the reason some of you have names that have a Z in them is because of the Arabs. You know, like my friend's Sabalsa, super Arab name, 2 Z's on it. Well, you know, when you say Ojalá, that's Arabic, a transliteration of Arabic for Inshallah, God willing, Allah willing. So, you know, but the country teaches us not to embrace our inner Arab because they're terrorists, right? Quote unquote. So, long story short, then the Spaniards brought that system to the Americas, and the indigenous people of the Americas adopted this water management system that was democratic. So I went to Bolivia to, to write about these water management systems right after water was actually, in the management of water, was the reason that you have now the plurinational state of Bolivia, right? Which is the first country that rescued control by indigenous people. It's run by indigenous people. That's the power, the decision making is controlled by indigenous people. It's not a perfect state, but they've reconfigured the idea of the nation state, of the nation, to be the plurinational state of Bolivia. And so the water was responsible for that, because they had protests when Bechtel, this big U.S. engineering corporation, came to control the water in Cochabamba. The explosion of the people in Cochabamba led to the election of Evo Morales, the first indigenous president of a major country in the Americas in 500 years.
Besides Juarez. Besides Juarez?
Besides Juarez, yeah. Besides Juarez, but Juarez didn't have like the indigenous base. And it was a different time, right? That was at the beginning, and it's a different moment. But yeah. So yeah, I have different ideas about what democracy is. So let's take media. I'm a journalist, so I should know about media, but I don't entirely know what media is at this point, because media comes from the word mediation. There's something between you and between me. The communication between us is mediated. Even our communication, most of our communication is nonverbal. So it's mediated by language. So there's a lot of mediation in human communications. So media is this thing that comes between messenger and recipient of message. One creates the message, the other receives it. And so, again, we're in a capitalist system, so communication is mediated more than ever. Mediated by television, which is a one sided, anti democratic. It's the favorite media of dictators, for example, that I've seen around the world, where, you have the ideal communication system for a dictator is I communicate out to you and you don't communicate to me. So television is perfect for dictatorship. Less so radio, because radio you can call in and do things. And then you have currently the age of social media, where there are spaces to change things up. You can use media to create alternatives. But even the social media now, as we see with Twitter and the right-wing fascist South African Elon Musk, we have a lot of problems with, what he's doing. He's dismantled media, Twitter as an emancipatory medium. So media is what comes between different individuals or groups trying to communicate. And so when it comes to media and democracy, I think in a world so mediafied like we live in now, we have to have independent, autonomous media to have democracy. And we're losing it, the spaces that we had, thanks to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these corporate dominated mediums, right? So that's the challenge, but there are still spaces that can be used. Like I led the creation of an organization called Presente.org. And I created Presente precisely because I wanted to model technological and political behavior, because politics, like there's a professor that used to teach here named Manuel Castells, brilliant theorist of communications and politics. And he basically said, look, if your politics isn't in the media, it doesn't exist, because it hardly accesses people outside of your little circle of physical reality. So media allows us to connect beyond physical reality. That's important in a globalized world, right? We have to be able to figure out how to fight the sources of climate change, for example, and we have to communicate across borders. Although at certain things, like one thing we learned in the guerrillas is don't write anything down. Why would that be? Because if they capture you, you have it written down, the fascists are going to know what information you have. So there are moments where we don't need too much media, that we just go back to the old school way of communicating our secrets. Sadly, we have to have secrets because things are getting more fascistic in this society. Remember that. It's okay to have secrets that are political secrets. And you don't show your cards until the right moment. I can talk later about that, but that's my initial thing. I'm sorry I went on so long.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question to that.
All right.
So I was really captivated by when you said if it isn't in media, it doesn't exist. And I think that's super critical, especially now when we have seen that media either incorrectly represents certain communities or it doesn't represent them at all. And with this lack of visibility or visibility of incorrect narratives, I think it's important for individuals like you to create authentic and personal narratives that do contribute to what these experiences are actually like, and experiences that aren't shaped by stories that might have been told by this white journalist that went to visit Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Salvador, that might interpret these situations as, oh, what's going on? It's just violent people. They don't see the reality of these communities and the different layers that come with these political problems or these governmental issues. So as an author yourself and as a journalist, there's a lot of responsibility to that, but also what are some of the challenges you've seen in sharing these narratives and being able to publish them and not being censored?
Wow, that's a great question. What are the challenges to, say, a Latinx writer, for example, in the United States? Correct me if I'm misinterpreting. What are the challenges to a Latinx writer in telling true and hopefully beautiful stories, because I think telling a beautiful story is as important as telling a true story, because we live in a sea of media garbage. Most of what we're consuming in video games, online, social media is garbage. It's ideologically toxic garbage that's beautifully designed. So if we're going to challenge the forces of power with that are able to produce beautiful garbage, the role, what I call the strategic power of the sublime and the beautiful, is urgently necessary. So if you're going to produce something, make it sing, make it beautiful, because just think about your families and how much garbage they're being subjected to on Spanish language television, in the radio, in English language, whatever their medium, they're mostly consuming garbage and not just being sold things, but ideological things about us, we ourselves. So the challenge is, how do you navigate a system that's controlled by corporate power that has invested billions and billions and even trillions to control minds to be good consumers and good workers, and not protest, not raise your voice if you're a woman, not come out as a trans person, not fight for labor rights, not challenge capitalism. So how do you get a more honest? So I don't have the complete answer, but my answer is in my book. Really, it's my best effort. My answer is in my writing. My answer is in, I would hope, I don't know, maybe the way I talk sometimes. I try to make it beautiful and powerful, because we are beautiful and powerful, but we're not told that. You know, our parents tell us we're beautiful and powerful in certain ways, but they don't tell us we're beautiful and powerful in ways that are effective often effective. They give us the power to carry forward, but we're on our own oftentimes to challenge the powers that be. Very few parents teach us to challenge power, partly because our parents are the power sometimes. They don't want to be challenged. So yeah, I think, so what I try to do, say for example with my book, I was telling the story of, at one level, there's two levels in my book. One is, say, the context and the situation. As a Salvadoran, US-born Salvadoran journalist trying to understand the reasons his family's homeland, El Salvador, becomes the most violent country on earth, quote unquote, in 2015, according to, international bean counters who count homicides. It's not the only measure of how violent a country is, because if you have other measures, guess which country becomes hands down the most violent country on earth for all known time? The only country that's dropped an atom bomb on innocents, killing hundreds of thousands, millions, that has starved, exploited, destroyed life like no other country. The United States of America. So, but we're here in the United States of America, although I don't use the word America except in quotes. So, to be clear, it's in my book. So, I'm here trying to tell the story about violence in El Salvador that's connected to the most violent country, the United States. That's at one level, but there's a deeper story than that. That was the story of my own life, the story of my father, me and my father, Pop, and why I felt what we Salvadoreños call medio muertos, which was a phrase given to us by the great Salvadoran poet Roque Dalton. Todos nacimos medio muertos en 1932. We were all born half dead in 1932. I didn't know what that meant when I read it in El Salvador, but when my cousin, he took this poetry out from literally underground under an almond tree, because it was forbidden to read that under a military dictatorship, because Roque Dalton was a revolucionario. And he showed me that poetry, and I was like, damn, that's cool. Even though I don't know what it means, I kind of knew that half-dead feeling. So then, as an adult, I realized I need to understand how I went from being half dead to being more fully alive as a human being. I was born half dead as a Salvadoran, like most Salvadorans. You have a feeling. Nobody's telling you why you feel that way. Nobody's telling you because the dictatorship, the longest standing military dictatorship in the Americas was El Salvador. When you have a military dictatorship, what does it do? It enforces silence with what? I have somebody showing me a gun thing with guns, with violence. The silencing of women, children, adults, workers. Silence the workers. Don't stand up for your rights. So, and oftentimes I realize in writing it, the first voice of the government, of the state, and of the powers that the state represents, corporate, are our parents. Our parents are often reproducing the silences given to them as workers. My parents were both in the union, and my parents, they would fight outside for workers' rights in Hyatt Regency Hotel with my mom, where we would go to protest and do pots and pans and make noise, and United Airlines with my father. But what happened when it came to Salvadoreño politics? Take a guess. Silence. Nada. Ni mierda. No se habla eso. You don't speak about that. So, there was silence. So, the deeper stories, how I went into the underworld of my father, especially, who was the one who enforced the silence with his violence. My dad beat my ass. My dad humiliated me. My dad pulled a gun on me. I was a rebellious kid. I was in a clique and kind of crazy. So, but I loved my dad as well. So nobody taught me how to love my dad. It was just, o se quiere o se odia. You either love or you hate. Nobody taught me, hey, I kind of love and hate my dad. Nobody taught me that. So there's a connection between the silence in the house and the silence enforced by the state. So I saw that from a young age, and I wanted to connect those silences and the silencing. But remember, what's the word for nation in Spanish? Starts with a P. País, that's one. What's another one? Patria. Patria, where does patria come from?
Patron, padre.
Padre. They're related. The father. The fatherland. So there's a connection between patriarchy and nationhood. Women know this better than anybody. Right? Patriarchy is connected to family structures. Our family structures are patriarchal. You're my son, you go to college, you're my daughter, you get married. That's still the pattern in a lot of our families. Those are the expectations created. Those are not just our parents, those are state models. So I was trying to figure out how to break up the silences. And so I go on a journey to discover my dad's secrets. I'm not going to tell you what my dad's secret is because I want you to read my book. And anybody listening, I want you to read my book. But let's just say my dad has this heavy ass secret. And I'm telling you this as somebody that survived war, that fought in a war, that has gone to gang hideouts that are some of the scariest friggin' places you can imagine, and narco hideouts. I've been having threatened at gunpoint by narcos, gangs, and fascist government. So I've made my life, as we say in Salvadoreño, I have a phrase, hay que tocarle los huevos al tigre. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Let's touch the tiger's balls.
You have to touch the balls of the tiger. If you're going to make social change, you got to make the tiger uncomfortable. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. What do you think? It's a waste of time. Why? If you're not going to make the tiger uncomfortable, the tiger's going to keep doing what the tiger does. In the case of El Salvador, killing, raping, torturing, destroying, exploiting. So I felt like, part of my story is how I went from being half dead to more fully alive. Along the way, I rebelled against my father. And then I rebelled against my father in the Salvadoran and U.S. state. I joined a revolutionary organization called the FML, El Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional. difficult decision for me, a U.S. born kid, grew up in the mission, to decide to go and fight in this war down in his parents' homeland. But the reason I did that, and I think there was a question kind of in there, is that, you know, revolutions don't come about just because of ideology. That's bullshit. Revolutions come about because of children. What happens to children and what parents respond to that, or people that love kids respond. You see enough dead kids, you're going to become a revolutionary. So I saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, keep on counting dead kids. So I decided I want to do something about this. I was doing social service work, but that wasn't enough. Yeah, serve the people, but also help the people fight back and join them in their fight. That's, for me, what being revolutionary is first and foremost, before being Marxist or Leninist or whatever, you know. So it's difficult to tell these stories. I had to break my own silence. Do you know how long I had the story of my revolutionary self? I've been revolutionary for, probably like 30 plus years. But when did I come out as a revolutionary? 2020, when my book came out. It was a big deal because of the media system. Because the media system centers around what I would call a liberal Democrat ideological position. In other words, hey, you know, the people that are editors at news organizations, the people that are editors at publishing houses, the publishers, the critics, the different entities involved in book publishing, television and film, news organizations are mostly Obama, Biden Democrats. Well, I'm kind of way off the charts of that very simplistic and dangerous politic. So for me as a revolutionary to come into the media system was no easy task. I had to not just tell a good story, I had to strategize how I was going to make it interesting and acceptable for a big publisher to accept. So what I did was I wrote my book before, and then I went to sell the book. So then when I had the book to sell, I knew what my story is about. So I said, hey, I wrote a proposal, said, hey, and Donald Trump was becoming president. So I picked the right timing. I waited. And then I was like, hey, look, I had gangs were in the news. So Pavlov, everybody ever Pavlov's dogs? What are Pavlov's dogs about?
You're conditioned, not trained.
Conditioned
to have a certain response to maybe like a reward, a treat.
Beautiful. So I did a Pavlovian move on publishers and editors by ringing the bell of, hey, I have gangs. Ching-a-ling-a-ling, gangs. And they start frothing at the mouth. Hey, I've got stories of guerrilleros, war, ting-a-ling-a-ling, ooh, exotic, cool. I got stories of narco stuff, ooh. And I got a good deal, and I published by a major publisher. I could have gone the route of independent publishing, which is a legitimate. If I was your age, I might consider that, build my own network, but I'm going to be 60, and I didn't have the time to create my own network. I wanted to focus on the writing. So one thing was I had to strategize to get into the system as a revolutionary on my own terms. When they bought the book was already written. So if you want to change my words, you have to come into the strategic field of my words. You got to come in and change the whole book. Versus if I only gave you a couple of chapters, then you can have more of a hand. You, the white editor, white middle class, upper class editor, can come in and alter my words if I give you only a couple of chapters. So it was strategy one. Number two was the sublime and the beautiful. You got to tell a sublime and beautiful story. One, to really say something worthwhile, right? Because what do you most value in the world? Family story. So if you value family, is there beauty in that? So then as a writer, you've got to bust your ass to tell as gorgeous a story as possible that will slightly approximate the power and the true beauty of that family to you. Because you won't tell the whole story of the beauty of your family. It's only a small sliver. But that damn sliver better sing. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So then, if you, or I use the sliver, or I could use like a, anybody play music? Or if you play guitar, you use a tuning fork. You've seen a tuning fork. You go, bing, and what do you do with the tuning fork?
You listen to the vibrations.
You listen to the vibration to make sure it's harmonious with what's on your instrument. So then, if you tell a beautiful story, you're basically tuning it to the human heart, that when they hear your story, it goes, the tuning fork moves your whole being, your body. Good writing's a lot about rhythm, I think. I wish I could go more into that, but just let us say that I aspired to tell a beautiful story about love, war, and revolution, right? Which is a forbidden story in this society. And I guess to sum up, my book is really, if I had to pick one thing it was about, it's what I call the tenderness that survives the terror. The tenderness that survives the terror. Because terror kills literally. And for those that are left who are witness to terror, it can kill the tenderness in you. Right? That's what makes a killer. Killer's made of a lack of tenderness. Right? Gang members are walking, talking, kind of traumatized young people whose fathers beat their ass and who lost a lot of tenderness towards themselves and others. So, I'll leave you with that it's a struggle, but it's one of the most important struggles you can take on as an individual and as a person who wants to make change. You have to preserve the tenderness in you to be able to sustain struggle. If you sustain a struggle without tenderness, then who gives a shit about your struggle? But if you sustain your politics, your revolutionary ideals, and you keep a tender heart, that's where you get unstoppable, man. You have to kill me now. Otherwise, I'm not going to stop. And I've had people try to kill me, and now, oddly enough, I've come to this point. I don't know if I'm becoming too hippie or California, but the most dangerous part of us, and you want to be dangerous in a system that's calls itself safe like this one. Mm-hmm. You want to be in an unhealthy system. If you're going to be in an unhealthy system, I'm encouraging you to do what? To be unhealthy? To be healthy. So both of those things go back to the tenderness towards yourself. And tenderness is tied to your truth. You're tender with yourself. You forgive everything you do, everything you are. You accept yourself, and you just move on. And then you look at others, and you're more open. So that's what I'll leave you with.